Hey, good afternoon. Now we're in our second part of, which actually our fourth topic for this subject, which is the dog muzzle, the vertebrae, and the ribs. Now, dogs have different types of muzzle depending on the breed. So we have the dolichocephalic, which is known to have longer muzzle, the mesocephalic, which happens to be middle, and we have the brachycephalic, which you have the short snouted dogs. So we have the dolichocephalic over here, mesocephalic, and brachycephalic over here. So your dolichocephalic, these are long, narrow-headed dogs. So examples of these are your collies, Russian wolfhound, the saluki. We have the borzoi over here. So this is a borzoi. And we have the Afghan hound. Mesocephalic or mesocephalic, you have here your Labradors, your German Shepherds, and your Great Danes. Your Aspen is also considered as mesocephalic or mesocephalic. And then we also have the brachycephalic. These are the dogs with short and wide, that have short and wide heads. So examples of these are the French and English bulldogs, the Boston Terriers, the Shih Tzus, the Pekingese, and the Pug. So we have here a Boston Terrier, and this you have a Frenchie, French bulldog, the French bulldogs over here. Take note that some brachycephalic breeds, like the English Bulldog, have their mandibles protrude rostrally to the maxilla, and this condition is called prognathism. So if you can see this one here, it's a typical prognathism. Now we go to your vertebrae. The vertebrae is composed of irregular shaped bones that make up the spinal column. They are grouped according to location. We have the cervical, which are found on the neck, thoracic, which are found on the chest, lumbar, lower back, sacral. These are the bones that connects with your pelvic girdle or hip bones. And then we have the coccygeal or caudal. These are the tail bones. All vertebrae have common features like the body, vertebral arc, vertebral foramen, and vertebral processes. So this is the canine vertebral formula. We have 7 cervical vertebrae, 13 thoracic vertebrae, 7 lumbar vertebrae, 3 sacral vertebrae, and 20 to 23 caudal or coccygeal vertebrae. So this is where they are. So you have here the cervical, then we have the thoracic, then we have the lumbar, the sacrum, which is covered by the wings of the ilium, which is one of the bones for your pelvic girdle. And this one over here up to here, these are your coccygeal bones. So we are now in the markings and surfaces of the vertebrae. We have the intervertebral foramen. This is the opening between vertebrae formed by the caudal and cranial notches of the adjacent vertebrae. These openings serve as a passageway of the spinal nerves. Intervertebral discs. These are made of fibrocartilage connecting the bodies of adjacent vertebrae. Next, we have the vertebral arc, also known as the neural arc. This is the dorsal part of that composed of 2 laminae and 2 pedicles. Next, we have the vertebral foramen, the space formed by the vertebral arc and the body, and all vertebral foramina of all vertebrae form the vertebral canal where the spinal cord passes through. Then we have the body. So this is the ventral portion of the vertebra that is thick and is shaped like a spool. And the cranial part, the one that is facing the head, is convex, while the one that is facing the tail is caudal. Then we have the spinous process. This is the dorsal projection of the vertebral arc, very prominent among the thoracic vertebrae. We also have the transverse processes. These are the lateral projections of the vertebral arc, and these are quite prominent in your lumbar vertebrae. They also have articular processes. These are 4 articular processes two cranial and two caudal, and they articulate with each other. So the articular process articulates with the articular process of the adjacent vertebrae. Need not to worry, your next laboratory exercise will be focusing on the vertebrae, the ribs, and the sternum. So this is an example of a vertebrae. So you can have, as you can see here, they have this is actually inverted. So this is the dorsal part, and this is the ventral part, and this is its body, and you have the vertebral foramen. So this is a cervical vertebrae. It's an example of cervical vertebra. So the spine and the transverse processes provide sites for muscle attachment, and articular processes form the synovial joints with the adjacent vertebrae. So we'll start with the cervical vertebrae. So this is the one that is located on the neck, and all mammals, that means if it's a mouse or a giraffe or a whale, all of the mammals have 7 cervical vertebrae. And they're characterized to have transverse foramen except for C7. So we'll go back to the previous one. So this is a cervical vertebra, as mentioned here. So this is their vertebral foramen. And this one over here is their transverse foramina. So these are the transverse foramina. Foramina meaning it's more than one. So except for C7, or the last cervical vertebrae, that's a common feature among the cervical vertebrae. So what is a transverse foramen? This is the hole through the transverse processes of C1 to C6, forming the transverse canal. Vertebral arc, the part of the atlas that connect the wing ventrally to form the vertebral foramen. And then we have the wings, also known as alae, and these are modified transverse processes. So later on, a few slides from now, you will get to see the atlas, which is actually C1. So this is the first cervical vertebrae named for its support of the head. So this articulates with the occipital condyles, which was discussed in the previous video, also in the lab, to form the atlanto-occipital joint. This is considered as an atypical vertebrae because it does not have a body and a spinous process. The second one is axis, and it possesses a ridge-like spinous process and a dens, which is a peg-like process located cranially, forming a pivot articulation with the atlas, thus the pivotal motion, or the no joint. So this is the atlas, and you have the axis. So this is the wings of the atlas. So as mentioned, it doesn't have any body, and it does not have a spine. So it does not, so typical or different from the other vertebrae. Well, this is the axis. So this is the dens. This is the dens over here. Oh no, this is the dens, sorry. This one is the dens. I am so sorry. So this is the dens, and this is its ridge-like spinous process. And take note of this one over here, this one, and over here also, and over here. These are transverse processes. Oh, foramina, transverse foramina, rather. Now we go to your thoracic vertebrae. So this is often characterized by articular facets where the ribs are attached, and they are also known to have very prominent spinous processes. They have what we call the anticlinal vertebrae because the thoracic vertebrae with the most vertically oriented spine, and for dogs, it's usually T11. Take note that spines of the thoracic vertebrae that are cranially located are inclined caudally, while the spines of the caudal thoracic vertebrae are inclined cranially. So if you will take a look from the previous slide, here we go. So these are your thoracic vertebrae. So this is T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, T7, T8, T9, T10. So take note of their spines. It's leaning towards the tail or caudal area. And then this is the anticlinal, and this is the what you call the after the anticlinal vertebrae, the spinous processes of those thoracic vertebrae after the anticlinal one is leaning towards the head or cranial. So what are the features of your thoracic vertebrae aside from having a very prominent spinous process? These are they have costal and transverse costal fovea. Sorry, I'm so sleepy. I'm slurring already. So the costal fovea, these are two facets for articulation with the ribs head that is located on the caudal and cranial end of the vertebral bodies of most of the thoracic vertebrae. While the transverse costal fovea is a facet on the transverse process that is articulated with the tubercle of the same numbered ribs. So I will let you guys know where it is located when we go to the lab. By the way, the rib number is the same to which thoracic vertebrae is attached to. So we have here, this is the ninth thoracic vertebrae rather. So this is T9. So these are rib number 9 over here. Also here, it's rib number 9. So those are, it's actually superimposed, very typical for a radiograph or x-ray. Lumbar vertebrae. These are vertebrae of the lower back region or loin. They have large size and long plate-like transverse processes. Sacral vertebrae. These are large bones that is actually a fusion of the large sacral bone. This articulates with the hip joint. And we have this sacral canal, the term for the vertebral canal through the sacrum. So what are the features of the sacrum? They have the sacral foramina. They have two, which are found on the dorsal and ventral portion, and they serve as a passageway for the spinal nerves. Wings, which is the lateral part of the sacrum that articulates with the os coxae to form the sacroiliac joint. Take note that the spinous processes in dogs for their sacrum are not fused. Later on in comparative anatomy, you will find out which one are fused. And finally, we have the coccygeal vertebrae, and these are the vertebrae on the tail, and they become progressively smaller distally or caudally. Clinical or applied notes. So these are the common vertebral deformities as being exhibited by the doodle over here. Scoliosis is the lateral curvature of the spine. So this is the view from above. So there is the lateral curvature of the spine. So two of my cousins actually have scoliosis. Yes. We also have lordosis, which is the curvature of the spine at the lower back. And then kyphosis is the posterior curvature of the spine. Thorax and ribs. So thorax is the bony cavity that is formed by the sternum, ribs, costal cartilages, and the bodies of the thoracic vertebrae. Its function is to enclose and protect the heart and the lungs. For the ribs, these are long curved bones that form the lateral wall of the thorax. For dogs, for dogs, the number of ribs corresponds to the number of thoracic vertebrae. Since dogs have 13 thoracic vertebrae, so they have 13 ribs all in all. Now the ribs are classified into three. We have sternal or true ribs. We also have a sternal or false ribs, and we have the floating ribs. The sternal ribs, their costal cartilages articulate with the sternum. So the dogs, the first 9 of its ribs are called sternal or classified as sternal ribs. For asternal ribs, these are ribs wherein the costal cartilages unite to form the costal arc, thus indirectly joining them to the sternum. Rib number 10, 11, and 12 are considered as asternal ribs in dogs. and floating ribs found only in dogs, and the costal cartilage does not attach itself to the sternum. So we'll go back here. So this is the floating rib. So as you can see, this is the floating rib. So it's not attached to the sternum. So what are these over here? This one over here. So these are actually the ribs itself. So these are the ribs, but those areas with freckles, or let's have dots on them, those are the costal cartilages. So these are the cartilages that connect the ribs with the sternum. The sternum is also known as the breastbone. Now, if you notice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the first 9 ribs, their costal cartilages are attached directly into the sternum. However, for rib number 10, 11, and 12, it is not. If you notice, rib number 10's costal cartilage is attached to rib number 9's costal cartilage. For rib number 11, its costal cartilage is attached to rib number 10. While lastly, rib number 12's costal cartilage is attached to the costal cartilage of rib number 11. And this one, the indirect attachment of the costal cartilages of the asternal ribs, they form a costal arc. So this one over here, this is the costal arc. And you have the intercostal space over here also. So what are the parts of a rib? So we have the head, which articulates with the caudal and cranial costal fovea of the adjacent thoracic vertebrae and the intervening intervertebral discs. The tubercle, which articulates with the transverse process of the same numbered vertebra. And we also have the intercostal space, which is the space between adjacent ribs. So here are the parts. So we have the vertebral extremity, which is the one that is attached to the thoracic vertebrae. Then we have the head. Take note where it's going to be attached to. And then we have the tubercle, and take note where in the thoracic vertebrae it's attached to. This is the neck. We have the angle. We have the body or shaft, and the sternal extremity. That is where the costal cartilage are attached. So breastbone. So for dogs, it's made up of 8. It's actually 8 unpaired sternebrae that forms the flooring of the thorax. So this is a dog's breastbone. So we have the manubrium, which is the first segment, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the last one is the xiphoid. So when you're going to know how, there's actually a formula or a shortcut every time you forget how many sternal segments or sternebrae a dog has. Always remember how many sternal ribs does a dog have, and you deduct it by 1. So since dogs have 9 sternal ribs minus 1, so they have 8 sternebrae or sternal segments. So the manubrium is the expanded first sternebra, and the xiphoid or the xiphoid process, the last sternebra that is thin and horizontal that is capped by the xiphoid cartilage. So there's actually a cartilage over here. So that's it. If you have any questions, please do ask. We'll try to answer your whatever it is. And always remember that when you're going to study for the lab, check out the leg. And if you're going to study for the lab, if you want to study for the lab, check out the leg. If you want to study for the leg, check out the lab. So while doing for the lab, you also check your notes on the lecture. And while doing the lecture, you also check for the lab. So that's how you're going to learn. So if you have any questions, please do. and I'll see you later.